Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's Q&A and conversation. I'm Jenilee and this is Angie. We're a social worker and dietitian duo at Nourish Your True Self. Now, we're not the only ones on the team. We do have a couple of other therapists that work with us, but Angie and I started this practice with a focus on helping people live authentic lives while combating disordered eating and the messages that we take on from diet culture, and which brings us here tonight. And so tonight we're going to be chatting about diet culture and all things diet. And so if you've joined us online and you got some questions, you can put your hand up or put your questions in the chat. We're going to pay attention. We had a couple of questions submitted from folks who weren't able to make it. And if you're joining us at the recording that we've uploaded to our YouTube channel, thanks for checking us out afterwards because you weren't able to make it tonight. And so, yes, welcome to our chat about all things diet. And so I just want to mention, Angie, I'm going to pass the baton to you, but the meme that we used to talk about advertise tonight's conversation was examples of diet culture. And we had a couple of comments on our social media just saying they didn't realize what diet culture was and all of the things underneath. And someone commented, it said, wow, we do all of these things in this world. And I said, yes, diet culture is rampant and not something that we typically label and talk about. And so that is what brought us here tonight.
Yeah, I actually had a client in the last 2 weeks say, "Oh, you think our culture is diet culture?" Because I just because we use those words all the time, right? So I just kind of said, blah, 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 diet culture. They're like, wait. And I shared the similar kinds of things. And they're like, oh, I didn't even realize.
Yeah.
It's swimming in the water, right? We're swimming in the water.
So normalized.
Yeah, totally.
So normal to label foods, and it's so normal to compliment people's weight loss. It's unfortunate we know this as people, humans, and also working in this Angie, that it's so easy to have our happiness, our worthiness dictated by the scale, or to exercise because we feel like we have to and not because we enjoy it, and all of those types of things. And so actually, can I just start with actually one that referred to the meme online that said, looking at the meme, that's everything we do. I'd like to know some more specifics. For example, I have a friend who takes supplements, which are appetite suppressants. She takes them before eating and does like thousands upon thousands of steps a day on an app. She's losing weight fast, eats very small amounts because she isn't hungry. And this person wrote in to say, I find it really tempting, but I'm curious about side effects in the long term. And is it really that harmful?
Wow, that's a good loaded bunch, isn't it?
I know, right? So I was like, let's just toss that one out there because I feel like, there's pieces of that we can most definitely untangle.
Totally. And I think the biggest one that sticks out to me is it is really alluring when you see somebody else having weight loss success in a weight obsessed world. Well, if they're doing it, maybe I can do it too. Maybe that's the ticket kind of thing, right? So there's a couple of things, and Jenilee, please stop me if I start going on tangents, because I made four notes, and I can go down science rabbit holes on every single one of them, and I don't know how deep people want us to go. So I'll kind of try medium, and you let me know if more is better or less is better.
Yeah, cool.
So I do find it interesting, right? People will call something like an appetite suppressant a supplement. Those two things really are very, very different. And appetite suppressants, there's a number of categories that mess around with your hunger signals and your fullness signals. Ultimately, I think the biggest myth, I would say, in that kind of realm is that we can fool our biology. We can trick our biology into thinking I'm not hungry and then I won't want to eat and then I'll just lose weight and my body won't react in any other way. And I think we forget that as living beings, our bodies are very complex and they are adaptive. So it doesn't take very long for your body to go, whoa, wait a minute. something isn't right, something's messing around, I'm not getting enough of what I need. What do I have to do to adjust to make sure that I can get what I need, or so that I can try to need less? So your metabolism will adjust, your hunger and fullness cues will ultimately adjust. And I think what people aren't always aware of is your cravings will adjust even if you don't necessarily feel hungry. What you're looking for or what is satisfying to you also shifts. In that, when you're restricting, right? So you're restricting your eating. In this scenario, it seems benign. It seems harmless because, well, I'm not hungry, so it's not like I'm denying myself. I just don't feel like eating. I think that the tricky part there is if oh, hey, let's look at this.
Yeah.
This is how a human body works, vase. And if this is the amount of calories that we need in a day as a human, and we're only getting this much, it doesn't take long before my body recognizes that that's not a good thing because I'm using more than I'm taking in, and it starts to make adjustments because human bodies, living beings, are in it for efficiency. We need to make sure things are working well, and we need to make sure things are working efficiently. So if I'm running at a deficit, stress, that's a big old flag for your body. Something is wrong. We better watch out for famine or starvation. I got to pull out all the backup systems so that I don't starve to death. And I know that that sounds dramatic for a diet with appetite suppressants. But at the end of the day, the reason 95 to 97% of diets result in weight gain at the end of the day is because your body really did believe that it was trying to save you from a famine and adjusted so that you wouldn't be able to lose weight easily, and adjusted so that you will get it back because it was under stress while it was losing.
Yeah. And even when I read the question to you, I slipped up a little and I put our stuff in to the question, right? That idea about I'm not hungry, and that idea that we can trick our body. And what our brain says is, well, I don't feel those hunger cues. So those things we've learned that tells us we're hungry, those grumbly tumblies, or maybe we haven't eaten enough, we start to get the shakes, or maybe we get a little dizzy, or maybe even some of us notice it's hard to concentrate. But the interesting thing is, just because our tummy isn't grumbling doesn't mean we're not hungry, Angie. So those appetite suppressants kind of just tell your body, don't have your tummy grumble. But that doesn't mean that just because we don't feel those things, our body isn't hungry. It just says, I'm going to have you turn off some cues from your body, which actually to me is quite scary and sad when we're taking supplements that say to our body, shh, some very important information to us, right? Especially because what have we really learned? You know, stomach growling. I'm hungry. If my stomach's not growling, am I hungry? Yeah, you are hungry. Even if your body doesn't have those typical hunger cues, you're still going to be hungry. And so that's where I hear you saying that trick piece, the supplement is just tricking. It's turning off that piece of your brain that says grumble the tumbly, but actually we are still hungry, aren't we?
Yeah, it's just suppressing our ability to feel it.
Yeah, suppressing our ability to feel it. And isn't that interesting when we think outside of food? You know, part of the work that I do as the social worker on the team is helping people identify their feelings, right? And that's one of the things is, you know, emotional vocabulary and how are you feeling, or how did that make you feel, or, you know, what's triggering. And so we actually talk on one hand about, we want to really bring those to the surface and talk about them, feelings and those types of things. But on this other hand, we have this diet culture world that's really asking us to suppress some of those things.
Yeah.
It is a bit of a catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah, rock in a hard place for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when she said, is it really harmful? You know, is there long-term effects that are harmful for appetite suppressants and, you know, eating small amounts of food and losing weight fast, she said. What would you say, Angie, in terms of long-term effects, and is it that harmful?
I guess it does depend on how intense somebody follows the diet like this, how intensely they follow it, and then for how long, and how repetitive it becomes. So the harm that I see most frequently is labeled as yo-yo dieting, right? And I'm quite sure that is a term that most people would be familiar with, where, oh, I've tried all the diets and I've lost all the weight and it always comes back. That weight cycling from repeated restrictive diets can be very, very harmful long term. It does end up making us stop listening to our internal cues, not really even sometimes being able to identify them anymore. A lot of the work that we do, Jenilee, is trying to help people remember, what does it even feel like when I feel hungry? What does it even feel like when I'm satisfied from a meal? Because we've spent so many dollars and minutes trying to not feel that, to follow this external rule. It is also very hard on your system and your heart when you're on a cycle of weight loss, weight gain, weight loss, weight gain, because your body has to adjust to all of those changes, and it can be very stressful. And there is something called starvation syndrome. And I will again say, for a lot of people who are just trying a diet and trying to lose weight and feel like they're trying to be healthy, I know that those words sound really dramatic, but what really is going on is your body is responding to running at a deficit and not having enough to run the right systems, and having to use stress hormones and other signals in your body to adjust so that it can still function. And to do that, it's turning down some stuff, it's turning off some stuff, it's adjusting in such a way that we can start to identify, even by symptom, that people are struggling with starvation syndrome. So is it harmful right now? In the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't say wildly, oh my gosh, go to the hospital harmful. No, but in terms of emotional health, mental health, and physical health, there absolutely are harms on all of those levels. And the more repetitive it is, the more it's kind of hammered into our brains that I must have done something wrong, I have to try again, and we do the cycle again. It is really hard on a human body.
Well, and I love, Angie, that you reframed it not just from like a physical harm, but also this, what we call whole self-health harm. And I'm realizing that on that meme, one of the things that is labeled as diet culture that we know is true is ignoring body cues. And so we learn to ignore our body cues in order to try and fit our bodies into what the world tells us maybe it needs to look like in order to be successful and happy and have all of these things. But actually what it forgets to, or it doesn't forget, it leaves out that we're actually going to teach you to ignore the things, ignore your body talk, ignore your body cues, which is actually the detrimental piece. Hey, just like if I were to say, shoving down your emotions is like shaking a pop bottle and expecting it not to explode. In the same way as ignoring our body cues, of course, in the same way, shake a pop bottle with the lid on and it's going to explode, not right away. But I'm hearing you say, keep shaking it. And there's definitely going to be some effects. And I think one of the big ones you said is that idea that if I'm not successful at a diet, then I'm told I must be doing something wrong, or I'm not trying hard enough, or I'm not motivated enough. And then it becomes this internalized thing, which what I'm hearing you say, and I hear you tell people and teach people in session, is actually, this is your body fighting to keep you alive and well. And it's this like battle between body fighting to keep us alive and well, and diet culture trying to convince us that we're doing something wrong when we can't lose weight and keep it off or maintain a restrictive diet or those types of things.
Yeah. It is your body trying to help. And in this culture, it feels like a kick in the ass.
Yeah, absolutely does.
Yeah. And I will, if it's okay, if you think it's reasonable, the losing weight quickly comment. From that one. I remember I don't even think I was in third year for my degree for nutrition. And we talked about different levels of weight loss in terms of severity and when we should be worried about malnutrition.
Mm.
And it's not very fast for people who are looking to lose weight. It's not very fast where we would start to call it a severe rate of loss, that we're going to start looking for and identifying markers for malnutrition. So, and I can kind of just quickly kind of skim off the top when we're not getting enough calories, when we're not getting enough of even one thing. So let's even pretend I'm getting enough calories, but well, I won't pick on a specific diet, but I'll pick on a nutrient, right? So I'm getting enough calories, but I'm not getting enough carbs, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
My body has backup systems to make sure that I can get what I need. Because a human body, there are really important parts that only run on carbohydrates. I can't run my brain, my central nervous system, and my red blood cells on protein or fat. I must have carbs. So humans have a backup system to make our own, which, yay, like we didn't, we wouldn't be walking around, right? Yeah. But those backup systems are meant for short-term emergency, right? It's trying to hide or hunt and gather so that I can get to the next thing that gives me what I need. So if I'm not getting enough of energy, or if I'm not getting enough of a specific nutrient, I will tell you most diets don't give you enough of both of those things at some level. I have systems that will save me. I have systems that will make sure that my brain does get enough carbs to run, not excellently, but well enough. And to do that, and I'm just gonna, this is deeper, but let me know if it's too deep. The only way that I can make carbs is to take muscle tissue and turn it into carbs. So even if I'm eating a high protein diet, but it's not enough calories or enough carbs, I'm muscle wasting to make carbs to feed my brain.
Yeah.
So it's this loop where it really does from this side, right? So if I'm speaking from your body's point of view, it feels like I'm opposing everything that you're doing, trying to save you, and then not getting thanked for it. That's what it feels like, right?
Oh, really? Because
oh my gosh, another big thing. And now, okay, I know how to fix this, and I'll rearrange things so that I can turn on the system that makes sure I'm going to make enough sugar for your brain to run. But I can only do that for a certain amount of time, and it's really hurting me. Mm-hmm. Tell that person I'm getting signals. I'm craving sweets. Well, people think there's something wrong with them, or they've got a sugar addiction, for example. It will come up in those moments when we're talking to people, right? And I'll say, well, I wonder if that's just your brain telling you to eat more because it's not getting enough, and it's in this alarmed state where it's trying to help us and save us.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes we see on the other side. So people might be like, yeah, so what? Like my body does this. It's hard work. It can do it for the short term, like I seem to be doing okay, guys. And I think the big piece there is, like you said, results in us feeling like we're not trying hard enough, not motivated. Not only that piece, but then we often talk to people like Angie who are struggling with what they'll call binging in the evenings. Mm-hmm. And, we really shame ourselves. We learn to shame ourselves for that. But those things, typically when we approach it, is to look at, what are you eating? How are you nourishing yourself? Because we can take the biology piece out of it first. Now, are there other things that contribute to binging? And I do this because there's a thing called subjective binging and objective. But at the end of the day, if you feel like you're binging, that's what matters. But to explore, there can be some reasons that aren't biological. So there might be some big feelings that are soothed through eating: loneliness, grief, sadness, fear, these types of things. But we also know a big player in that is, if you're not getting enough during the day, there's these backup systems that you're talking about that say to us in the evening, whoa, If you have time now, get to that fridge and eat as much as you can, because I didn't get enough during the day and I'm worried you might do this again tomorrow. So we can help people try to nourish themselves more fully during the day to see, does that have effect on your night eating? Can we look at it through a different lens rather than shaming you for binging in the evenings? Can we look at why is it happening rather than you must not be trying hard enough? On the diet, much like sugar addiction, you said, we see, you could Google it. There's places on Google that say it's a thing. What I've come to learn from you, Angie, and being in sessions and in this work is actually that's our body craving sugar because it didn't get enough of something during the day. But isn't it interesting when we can see the diet culture world calls it sugar addiction, and we're over here saying that's actually not a thing. That's your body saying, I need something. I didn't get enough. There's no shame in that, right? But part of coming into these spaces and having these conversations is, can we decrease the shame around that and really be like, what is my body saying? What does it need? Am I giving it enough? Am I maybe not giving it enough? Is there more to this than I'm just not trying hard enough? Yeah. Now, I wonder, Angie, can I pose another question that was put out on social media?
Yes, I feel good about those 4 points.
They were great. They were great.
Give me deep, kind of get in there a little bit.
Yeah, I think they were great. Now, this one, it's wondering about, so it was saying someone in their life has always been on the bigger side and this has affected their health greatly. So examples are double knee surgeries, pain injections, those types of things. And in the past year, she's lost quite a bit of weight and says that she feels so much healthier and can get around, isn't afraid to leave the house. And so what this person, there's a couple of different aspects in there, Angie. We can each touch on those from our forte. But what they really want to know is there a point when it is okay to diet and do these things? I think A is the question, like, is it okay? This is making this person's life easier. But then the second part of that question is, is it okay sometimes to just diet in general? Or is it sometimes okay to choose diet over something more invasive like bypass surgery? And what is the answer to someone who is looking for a healthy BMI? So if people can see the smile on my face, is because that question seems simple and it is complex. And so I'm going to break it down to 3 things there, Angie. Is it okay to diet sometimes in general because it makes it easier, feels better on my body, I feel healthier with the results? B, is it better to diet sometimes, or is it okay as what I'm going to call harm reduction diet instead of things like bypass surgeries? And then there's the question around healthy BMI.
So I'll tell you, this will take us to the end, right?
Yeah, I think we've hit both things, right? We've hit this kind of diet motivational piece where there's been a lot of questions, but then we do get this a lot on social media, emails of people that show up and say, well, if I was in a smaller body, wouldn't my life be easier? And is it okay sometimes that I do that? And so, yeah, I think that that's okay. And I'll let you know if we get any questions in the chat, and I'll just be like, hey, we just need a couple minutes. But as for right now, I think we could spend some time on this one.
Okay. And these are really good, deep questions, because this becomes a moral issue, and it shouldn't, is the tricky part. But it's hard to separate from that, right? Yes. Shouldn't I be going for health? Shouldn't I be trying hard to make sure that I can be as healthy as I can be? And I think the word health has become very loaded.
Yes.
And I think that's the concern, right? Health does mean dieting. Like that does what the dieting world has adopted and stolen the word health, so that when we hear the phrase, oh, this is a healthy choice for lunch, we all know that means lower calorie, which isn't necessarily healthier, but that's now the common understanding, right? So the idea that, well, it's helping my health concerns if I'm losing weight. Weight does influence our health, as does many things. Yes. It is not controlling them, though. And I think the difference between influence and control is where sometimes we get switched,
Yeah.
where we're using the word control, but we do actually mean influence. So I think it's really important to remember that there are no obese specific diseases. There's nothing that somebody in a fat body can have and be diagnosed with that somebody in a skinny body also wouldn't have and be diagnosed with.
Right.
That's really important to recognize, because oftentimes in the medical world, we are, I'm going to use the word dismissed. Well, if you would just lose weight, some of these problems wouldn't be problems. I think it is hard to deny that they don't influence your problems. Your joints do feel different when you're carrying around different amounts of weight, but then it becomes well, is it okay? Well, how much harm am I causing and how much harm am I helping, right? So
yes.
There are certainly ways that I've had people chat with me and talk about diet and how they're doing things, and they do tend to lose weight, but the goal isn't let's get to this number on the scale or let's get to this BMI. It's more about behavior and feelings and emotions, and what am I doing and how can I feel like I'm doing the best that I'm doing. And oftentimes that becomes more about treating binge behaviors or something like that, or getting enough so I'm not on this kind of all or nothing train where I'm being good, and those are big old air quotes, and that just means dieting. Being bad, which tends to mean free for all, and trying to find that middle ground so that over time I'm actually balancing out what I'm eating, and that might shift weight. And I would say, kind of skipping into the second question, it is less harmful than shifting a body that is functioning to something that surgery that is shifting functionality,
yes,
and absorbability and things like that. So certainly there is a harm reduction there. It's the cyclical nature that I always come back to that I'm worried about. Is there a way that we can minimize the risk of weight cycling, because that isn't better for your health?
right.
Studies show, and there are quite a number of them, that even if I'm at a higher than average body weight but steady, I have less health concerns generally than somebody who's up and down and up and down and up and down and over a decade up. Right.
Yes.
And I also think I'm just going to make a little plug. We look at these studies. I think it's really important to recognize those studies are population studies with tens of thousands of people, and that is all self-reported information. So when we talk about significant findings in studies, it is impossible to then decide, well, then this is what I'm going to do with my body based on the study. But we can start looking at behavior as a different thing than just the calories in, calories out.
Yes.
So it's not always a bad thing, and it certainly isn't always the worst thing. And I fully understand that it is easier to live in this world in a smaller body. 100% that's true. And we have to be very aware and sensitive to that fact. And if I'm cycling and causing harm over time, where could I actually jump off of that
wheel, like the
thank you
yeah.
hamster wheel? There's a lot of places where I could jump off and still be positively affecting my health, but not necessarily focused on weight.
Well, and I think you've said the key there, Angie, is that the world that we live in, especially due to diet culture, we entangle up health and weight. And so this idea that I'm healthy if I'm at a healthy weight, often healthy weight is defined by diet culture and not necessarily per individual, right? So when you talk about those studies, we can't break it down what's best for you and I, because they don't take the individual piece into it. And so I think that's where the biggest detriment is that we're taught to entangle health and weight, which are very separate things.
But influence each other.
Yes, but
right? Like that's the tricky part there, because they're not. independent.
Right.
Well, they are independent, but they do kind of bump up against each other.
Yeah,
But the
but one
idea,
doesn't equal the other.
no, and I think the idea that if you just did, if you just lost weight, your health would be better. There is no guarantee that that is true. This is where influence versus control comes in, right? So if a higher weight is one of the risk factors for the thing that I've been diagnosed with, then the idea is, well, if I take that risk factor away, then it will be better. That's not actually how it works. It's much more complex than that. I don't really want to get too much because BMI is a big conversation, but the idea that I can control my risk factors, you have influence over them, certainly. But the idea that I can, if I shift one of my risk factors, my health will magically change.
Yeah. And I think that's
that's
subtle.
sold to us. That's sold to us.
Yeah, and that's a subtle but profound difference, right? And I hope that people can hear that. And if not, pause, rewind a little if you're watching this on YouTube and hear that again, right? Because that is a subtle difference about control versus influence. Because the messages we often hear from the diet culture world really try to sell that we can control things, our risk factors, our health, all of these things by controlling our weight. But what's very different, subtle and profound, is that we can influence them, but we cannot control them.
And that doesn't feel good. We want to control things.
Of course we do.
Of course we do.
Welcome to being human. It feels way easier when we're in control of things.
And it's not a fun time to realize you're not. Right. But to find its place, I think, takes a lot of heat off of people. Because I think the thing that we haven't touched on, well, we've kind of touched on a little bit, the emotional and mental well-being of people who are so heavily focused on weight to influence their health isn't taken into account. And that there are so many studies that show us that influences our health more negatively than the food we would or wouldn't eat by itself.
Yes. And so that's the piece of where the emotional, when we talk about harm and those types of things, that's where we see the food anxieties or extreme food rules, or maybe even avoiding social outings because of the food that's going to be available or not to you. And then, so think about that. If we start avoiding social places because of food, well, then we miss out the nourishment of being social, that sense of belonging and connection that we know is actually a huge piece of people's health. We actually know that social isolation and a lack of connection with people is one of the most dangerous things for our health. It's one of the biggest predictors of chronic disease is isolation. And so when we think that, our dieting and these cycles can create these anxieties and these fears that then disconnect us from people, then we can start to see, oh, wow, that this is beyond weight and health, but really our whole self health piece. Where I love the work that we get to do, Angie, because we get to talk to people about these things and take kind of the shame and things out of it and talk about, what got you here? What keeps us stuck in these moments? And where did these food anxieties come from? Do you really have a fear for these foods? Or is it something that I always say to people, or was that something we learned and it gets plugged into us? All of a sudden, carbs are bad. I'm going to pick on carbs because they get picked on a lot, right? And so in these spaces, sometimes we say to people, can we be curious about unplugging that value that carbs are bad and just being curious about it for a while? You can plug it back in if you want, but at the end of it, you might be curious of, I'm not sure I want to plug that in for me anymore. I'm curious about how maybe I was taught that, but that doesn't fit for what I've learned and know about what my body needs anymore. And we could say that about food anxieties. We could say that about social outings. We could say it about many of the things that would have been on that image we used to promote tonight's Q&A and conversation. Yeah. And so I think you mentioned, yes, diets can be less harmful than surgically changing our bodies. So in a harm reduction approach. I think if people are wondering, we often get asked, like, is there a good diet? And I think, Angie, we could say in the same way as, dieting is harm reduction to surgery, that you could put diets on a scale, and there's some that are much more harmful than others. And what's cool about this space, and I hope people can sense it from us, is when you get to come into this space, you get to have feet in the diet culture world and still be curious about this, sometimes what sounds radically different than what we hear out in the world about how we think about food and our body movement. In this space, we can just be curious about it. And somebody said to me the other day, Jenilee, it's interesting because I thought I'd come to you guys and just pretend I was listening. But I after some time with you, it's scary for me, but I'm at a 60-40 now, 60 diet culture, 40 you guys, and that's scary. And I say, well, thanks for being here. Same like those that show up and say, Jenilee, I'm thinking about going on a diet. Are you going to fire me? And I say, no, you get to choose those things for yourself. Just because we work from an anti-diet, health at every size approach doesn't mean this is where we're extremely different. We're not going to shame you for that stuff in this space. You get to choose that. You know what fits for you and not. But what's interesting is when you come to these spaces, whether the Q&A's here, come meet with us, that there's a curiosity about, is there another way that I could be thinking about food and my body and what is nourishment and health and weight and all of these things? And I always say to people, I think that's the coolest spot to be in, a foot in both worlds. I think that's really neat. Yeah, but on both sides of the fence, that's okay. Welcome to this space, right? And much like we said in the beginning, that we hear these stories or we see these people and it's glamorous, it's tempting. And so it makes sense that we're going to have feet on both sides of the fence sometimes. Now, Angie, I know you mentioned BMI. It's a big thing.
Big thing.
And so, we've got 15 minutes or so. And so whatever it takes, I think we can use to chat about BMI and why is it such a big thing. Yeah. And see if any other questions pop up before we close out for the evening.
Yeah. BMI is your body mass index. I think it's important. I think people have heard now, I feel like many people have heard, oh, BMI is garbage, but don't, and if they haven't heard that, we would still think that that's really important, or we've heard it and don't really know why people would say that. So BMI is really easy to measure. So we use it. We use it in studies and we use it in the medical community. We use it for diagnosing. It's really important to, well, here's a crash history course from somebody who hates history. BMI is not a scientific measure, nor was it ever intended to be. It was not meant to be a measure of health. It was not meant to be an individual measure. It was meant to be a population measure. But because it's easy to identify, easy to measure, and easy to slot people into those numbers, it is relied upon an awful lot in this medical world. And for some of us who are old enough, I would challenge you. I think it was the year 2000, maybe the year 2001. It might have been the 90s, and I'm really sorry. But what normal BMI was considered, right? So everybody's height in the whole world is on a bell curve. Everybody's weight is on a bell curve. So what they did to try and make BMI make sense is they took that middle portion of the bell curve and made those numbers normal. I'm just going to say the year 2000, it was around there for sure. I remember being furious. They shifted what those numbers meant. So more than 20 years ago, what your BMI was to be diagnosed as obese is actually less now. So all of a sudden we had, 25% more people are obese. We're just measuring it differently. We've changed what the diagnosis means. They have also since changed it a second time, so that the highest BMI for normal and healthy, and please know I'm doing those air quotes so hard. is actually average in terms of weight when we do population studies. So it's curious that the medical community would choose average to be high normal, right? And then the idea that we can control our BMI and get it to the right number. I remind you of that bell curve. Those folks on the ends, right? The folks who have a very small body and the folks who have a very big body are still within the realm of normal bodies. That's the bell curve.
Yes.
But what we're trying to do is make people shift into this bell curve because we know we have influence over weight. So let's just control it and get you to a 20 to 25. And that's not what it's meant to be. And that's not how we're supposed to use it. And it's very harmful to try and force human bodies into a shell that they don't fit into.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes people, Angie, will say to us like, well, then why is it still used in these types of things? And that's a whole other Q&A and conversation to talk about the systemic things that create why we still use BMI. Yeah, I feel like that's a whole other Q&A and conversation to explore into the social pieces of why BMI is still used, other than the fact that it's easy.
That, to me, that's the only good reason that anyone would continue to use it. Just knowing that it was, it was calculated based on white men who the guy knew, not people.
No.
And then extrapolated to populations. So it's wildly, for a global measure, just stupid.
Right. And that's
easy to calculate.
and easy. And I think that's where that it's the idea that there are systemic barriers to health at every size, which and that's where I say, oh, that's a whole other chat we could get into around body trust and the systemic pieces of why it's okay that BMI is still used and why we use that for people, because there's definitely systemic weight stigmas that influence our continued use of those things. Because to say that, you said it, Angie, there's no denying that there's thin privilege in this world. So, which also means that on the other end of the spectrum, there is fat body stigma. On the other, there isn't one end of the spectrum without the other, right? But if we could live here in the middle where every body is healthy in its own way, yes, what a different world we would live in. But there's reasons that we have this, not good ones, but I feel like that's a whole other Q&A and conversation. If you're interested, drop us a line and we can schedule one of those in for the future to talk about some of those things about oppression and those types of things that that diet culture and some of these measures keep us trapped in.
Yeah, which are way worse for your health than whether you.
Well, what is it? I was trying to think of what you always say, Angie, when people are thinking about, like, I don't know, I'm going to pick on pizza. I don't know why, it's either pizza or broccoli, and what do you say to people? How do you say it? I love how you say it, that it's do you know what I'm going to say?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to say
you totally do.
The amount of stress and thought and obsession and ruminating we've got about whether or not I'm going to eat this pizza and what it's going to do to me. And then I eat it and then I worry about it. The amount of stress that I put my body through with that is actually more harmful than whatever the hell the pizza was going to do in the first place, because your body sees pizza as chemical components that it can use for energy, et cetera, right? It's not judging. And all of those judgments and external messages that it's like a cyclone, right? It's just spinning around in our head and we're so worried about it. Just the stress hormones that are released during that time is actually harder on, for example, joint inflammation than the pizza. The pizza was never going to do that.
Yeah, that's totally what I was thinking. The stress that we put on around our food choices and the shame and guilt that we feel afterwards is actually more harmful to our system than anything the pizza could have ever done.
Yeah.
Right.
We're
and that
really
comes to
focusing on health, right?
Yeah, and that comes to that whole self-health piece too, eh? And thinking about the emotional tools, not only the biological tools of dieting and in that yo-yo, but the mental and the emotional strain that we put on ourselves throughout that cycle as well, and that kind of guilt and shame cycle that diet culture can keep us trapped in eating. And I even think, this might blow some people's minds, but to eat, emotionally eat is an okay thing, right? The to worry about it is actually more harmful, because here's the thing, I'll tell you, any tool, if it's your only tool, is harmful.
Yep.
And so if all you ever did to cope with your stuff was eat, I would say we need to increase your toolbox. But if you told me the only thing you ever did was meditate or have baths or, I don't know, go in your garden, and it was the only thing you did to cope with big emotions, I would say the exact same thing. We need to increase your toolbox, because not all tools will work the same all the time. Think about it like a belly ache. Sometimes we need Pepto-Bismol. Sometimes we want some flat ginger ale. Sometimes we need a hot water bottle. Sometimes we need an app. And if we can treat our whole self-health in the same way that we would treat a bellyache, knowing that I've got a toolbox of ways to cope, and sometimes Pepto-Bismol works, but other times I need a nap, can be the same thing. Food can also be in there, right? And it can actually be soothing. Many cultures will call it comfort food for a reason, right? It can be comforting, and the soothing that we can get from comfort foods can be quite wonderful for us and helpful. And the stress and the shame that we put on ourselves for emotionally eating is quite harmful.
And then we'll technically almost always start that cycle.
It ends up being a cycle.
Then it becomes a problem.
Yes, and that's where we see it becoming a problem. And so if there's anything that we've chatted about tonight that you're curious about, please comment, send us messages on our social medias, whether that's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. You can send us an email. You can find us at our website, www.nourishyourtrueself.ca. There's a contact form on there. If there's anything we've talked about that you're curious about, drop us a line. We love talking about this stuff. If there's things that you'd like us to talk about, we've aimed to do Q&A and conversations quarterly or so. And so if there's things that you'd like to see us or hear us talk about, please drop us a line about that as well, because that's what these are all about. Hey, we want to come on and talk about what are people curious about. And we touched on a lot of stuff today, big stuff, tried to keep it kind of high level, down a little bit. And so you might be curious, you might want to know some more. We're open to the conversations. Hey, Angie?
Totally, at all times.
Yeah. And so I don't see any other questions, live questions. I don't know. Do you have anything else that you want to say before we head out, Angie?
No, I think the biggest thing was those were deeper questions than I expected, which I'm really excited about. But then I do wonder if some of the easier or surface ones were missed. Yeah, totally let us know, and we can kind of come back to this topic. It's a big one. On our next one.
Yeah, because I think when I initially advertised it, people wanted to know about specific diets. And so if that's something that you're interested in, drop us a line, because I know that that Angie can send you some resources, or maybe it's a phone call, or maybe you just book. I like to say, if you want to know about specific diets and stuff, that's Angie's gig. If you want to know about the pain and the strain of the stress cycle or the shame cycle, come on, bring me on in. But Angie, I think folks, it's important for them to know that sometimes people meet with us as a team, but also we're available one-on-one for these types of things. And so maybe I said something that piqued someone's interest, let me know, and maybe it's you that have piqued someone's interest. But we're always available to meet with people, whether that's as a team or one-on-one, to talk about these things more. Yeah. And so thanks for everyone who joined us live tonight. It's always super cool when we've got people here live with us. And if you're tuning into the recorded version, thanks for checking us out recorded, and for spreading the word. We always appreciate the love when people show up, let other people know what we're doing. And together, that's how we change. I was going to say, that's how we change the world.
I would totally just say that.
It is. It is. I say that when you join these conversations and are open to them, you become the wave that is becoming the radically different idea about health at every size, trusting our body, listening to our body cues, and you become a part of that wave that is here. It's
because
coming.
it is different, but it is not small.
No, it isn't. And so thanks for being everyone live or recorded. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Yeah, have a really good night, everyone.